Hello, my name is Alan, and I'm one of the local Meeps that plays Katsu. And a lot of my teammates are always asking me, how do you block Katsu? That's a question that is not very easy to answer, partly because part of Katsu's game plan is to hide information. And sometimes Katsu will try to do tricky things in order to get the blocks they want or the blocks they don't want. But there's a couple of heuristics we can follow in regards to that. The first thing to know about Katsu is, I would assume every Katsu, but this is just talking from me. When I look at my hand, I ask myself a question of if I have it or if I don't have it, meaning if I have a combo line, if I have a way to just push through my opponent's blocks in order to get my big combo turn. Obviously, this applies more to Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, which is the most common mask that Katsus will run nowadays. It has a lot of explosive power, and it can create this ridiculous Art of War or Harmony turns that are at least 30 damage or even more. I mean, Actually, I personally have had turns where I present about 53 damage to an opponent. Lynx is really explosive. So this video will focus mostly on things that could happen with Lynx. While Momentum is still a great card, it has more of a consistent value in regards to how it plays. But Katsus nowadays are not as much of a value deck necessarily, especially if they're like trying to do the big combo. So you get more. You tend to get more out of Lynx. Anyway, so with the question of if I have it or if I don't have it, there's a few heuristics we can follow. The first one is you need to ask if the Katsu has a high chance of having a natural line. So let's say that their hand, for some reason, is this right here, which is pretty great. Let's see. Let's just go with that, right? So they have a surging, they have a descendant to follow it with, they have bonds, and then, well, whatever, they're gonna do all kinds of things. So generally, it is my opinion that if Katsu has started with a 4-card hand and they present you a Surging Strike, it's very likely that they don't have it and they're trying to get it. So maybe they have a hand that looks like, let's say, maybe they have a hand that looks like this, right? So they have the Surging and they present you with the Surging, but they don't have the next one. So they're hoping that they get a hit in order to either discard the Fluster or the Dishonor to get the Descendant or the Whelming or whatever have you. And then they have a line, and then they have a combo. In those situations, it is probably appropriate, I would say, to block the Surging Strike when they have 4 cards in hand because they have less likelihood that they already have the follow-up. Now, assuming that you do block it, and then let's say they actually do have a Descendant, for example, but they don't have the bonds, then of course they're going to follow with the Descendant, and they're still hoping that that hits in order to get the bonds with the Katsu ability, with the Katsu trigger. Generally, I would advise that if you decide that you don't think they have it because it's a 4-card hand and you're blocking the Surging, that then you also block the follow-up, the Descendant or the Whelming. Generally, if they didn't have the second part of the combo, then they'll just throw something else. Like, let's assume that instead of having the second part of the combo, they just had like 100 wins. Then, yeah, in this hand, for example, they probably will do something like that. They'll pitch the Dishonor. Maybe Kodachi, maybe not. They can Kodachi later if you want. But they'll go with the Surging, see if they hit. If they don't hit, then they'll throw the 100 wins or something like that. In a hand like this, for example, if they don't have either the bonds or the whelming of the gust wave, I would generally probably get a whelming gust wave just to draw a card and then try to get a more explosive turn. But yeah, but let's assume that it was like this, right? Then yeah, if they do that, most likely what is going to happen is Kodachi, by pitching this one, surging, and then if you block it, they're just going to follow with 100 wins. You could let it hit if you want at that point. I think it's safe to do so. And then they're probably just going to arsenal the bonds. Now, this changes if they have a 5-card hand. If they have a 5-card hand, not only are they more likely to have it, but also they're more likely to have pieces that get it. Generally, when you have a Katsu that has maybe sat on a arsenal, maybe 1 or 2 turns, the more they sit on an arsenal, the more likely it is that they have it when they play the surging. So let's say it's something like this. This is fine. I mean, let's just keep it like this, right? So they're going to open with the surging. You maybe block. They may do Art of War. Then they get it over. Then they get it with something else. But sometimes they may have a ridiculous hand, and maybe it is something closer to this. And if they have this, you're not stopping it. So on a 5-card hand, with the asterisk that the more that the arsenal has sat in the same spot, the more likely it is that they have it. So if you were to decide that you're going to block a 5-card hand from a Katsu, if that arsenal has been there for 2 turns, it is more likely that they have it than if they had just barely arsenaled it last turn. Especially if they had a wonky hand the turn before. Regardless, generally speaking, I would say that if they have a 5-card hand, I would not block the surging. I would let the surging hit, see what they search for, see what triggers they do, and all that stuff. And then you want to probably value block at that point. If they follow with a whelming is a great card to block. It draws a card, and it just can let them get off to the races in some ridiculous ways. Aside from value blocking, if you are of a class or a hero that cares about dishonor, which makes you lose your hero ability, then when you let the surging hit, you see what they get. And depending on what they're getting, you want to value block while at the same time trying to ensure that you do not get dishonored. So you probably want to hold back a couple of cards to block the dishonor that is likely coming. With dishonor, they do need to have a descendant gust wave on the line. So if they're only getting whelmings, you're not getting dishonor, but they could get tricky. The second card in the chain could be the whelming, and then they go bonds, and then they go the descendant gust wave, and so on and so on. So they could still dishonor you down the line. So it's always good to keep track of that. I think that's a good heuristic to have when it comes to if they have 5 cards it's a 5-card hand, you are probably correct to not block the opener, the surging strike. Now, there are other situations. And before I move on, in regards to openers, so usually you have the surging strike, right? And then obviously there's sometimes that there's Be Like Water. Be Like Water can be very explosive. It can become a surging strike. And also, if a Katsu opens with it, and if Be Like Water hits, not only are they triggering their Katsu, their links, but also it becomes a surging strike. So it can be really explosive. But regardless of that, because these 2 cards are not combo cards, so scales doesn't come into play, I would generally suggest to not overblock these 2 cards. So you go ahead, and if you're blocking Be Like Water, which you probably always should, just block it for 3. And if you decide that you're blocking the surging, block it for 5, or if it's the yellow one, block it for 4. If it doesn't cost you anything to overblock it, let's say for whatever reason you can't block 5 because the lowest you can block with 2 things is 6, then sure, do 6. But the reason why I say that is because if you are, the only way that these two get pumped, there's a few ways. Out of War can do it, obviously, and Ancestral can do it. Now, usually Ancestral is the bigger culprit on this, but Out of War is also going to happen a lot. The only reason why I make a difference on this is because Out of War, if they're going to Out of War, there's a chance that it's a combo turning, which is going to get really explosive anyway. But regardless, the reason why you don't overblock it is because they don't have the pump in their hand all the time. And if you're overblocking every single time on these two cards, you're giving the Ancestral Empowerment way too much value. It's basically becoming a card that just makes your opponent overblock every time and waste cards. So I would just block it as presented, so 3 or 5 or 4. And then if they have it, they have it. And then you go from there, obviously. Now, moving on. So that's the opener when they have a surging, and then you look at how many cards they have. They started their turn with, and then you make a decision. Some of the other common openers tend to be things like, actually a Descendant is a really good opener on the combo turn. A lot of times, Katsu will actually prefer to open with a Descendant Gust Wave than with a surging on a combo turn, on a turn where they're going to go super wide, because it gets that much closer to doing an extra bonds. If you start with Surging Strike, then that's a card that could have been part of the 2-card combo of the bonds, if that makes sense. So if you open with this, go with this, go with this, when you get to your first bonds and then you start searching for other cards from your graveyard, you've already played 3 cards. But if you start with just the Descendant and then move on to the bonds, it is more likely that you can go further with an extra bond and so on and so on. Just by the nature that Surging Strike is not part of the bond cycle, so to speak. Anyway, so if they open with a Descendant, that's a really hard one to do, especially if they go Out of War. Sometimes they open with sometimes they start with Out of War to see what their hand looks like in order to plan their turn. Sometimes they'll just attack with the Descendant and you'll block for 3 or what have you, and then they'll Out of War and get over it and then do all their searching. But generally, if they're opening with a Descendant and if they're going to go big in that turn because maybe they have an Out of War, then it is very likely that they also have a bonds in there. So if you think about it, if they send a Descendant and they're going to follow with a bonds, you can't stop that. And then they get another part of the combo. And then let's say they get, after that, they just get another Descendant. And then let's say they had a bond in their hand already or whatnot. You're not going to stop that. That's inevitable. It's just too powerful. You have to block the first 4 attacks. And if they have a +1 from Out of War or maybe Harmony, we're talking 4, 4, 5, 5. So you have to stop 18 damage before you stop any triggers. It starts becoming a little unfeasible to do that. So if that happens, and once again, this is mostly for 5-card hands. 4-card hands are a little weaker, and you can maybe try to block them more. Especially if Katsu is not going to try to play a 4-card hand with Out of War or Harmony. It will be a 5-card hand usually. So usually you just let they open their hit, the Descendant Gust Wave, and just see what they get, see what they do, and then you value block from there. If they're opening with the Descendant Gust Wave, it's very unlikely that you'll get Dishonored because they're not likely to throw a Dishonor halfway through the combo. It's very rare for that to happen. So you can confidently value block most of the time in regard to that. Let's see, what else? So that's the situation with that there. Now, some other openers could be spinning wheel kick or 100 wins. Generally, these two openers are just they're solid openers that are trying to build. Um, they're trying to build a board state in which Katsu can do a big combo turn. So these cards usually don't open on the big combo turns. It's more like a setup thing. So maybe they'll open with spinning wheel kick, and maybe you block it, maybe you don't. It's fine if you do or you don't. It kind of depends on what you have in your hand and if you think it's a blocking hand. But let's say that the spinning wheel kick does hit. Let's say maybe you even value block it a little bit and just block 3 or just let it through. Likely the Katsu is gonna discard a 0 cost card and get something that is part of the combo for later. So let's say maybe they don't have enough whelmings in their graveyard and they need whelmings for the combo turn. Maybe they'll get like a whelming and just throw it at you and then see what happens. It depends on how many whelmings they're running if they're gonna do that. But a lot of the times I sometimes get a dishonor if I don't have one in the graveyard, or I get a fluster because a fluster is a good bonds target for later on. It's just a lot of these are setup turns. With the 100 wins, you could also have a 100 wins line coming your way. So you could have they could try to do something like this, right? They could try to do like 100 wins followed by 100 wins followed by Winds of Eternity. So that's a 3-4-4 turn. It's pretty decent, pretty respectable. And they probably also get to Arsenal one thing. So that's really strong. But once again, with this card, you're not as much in danger of the big combo turn happening, unlike when they open with Be Like Water, Descendant, or Surging Strike. So those are the openers there. Another opener that Akatsu might do, which is kind of weird, but it happens sometimes if Akatsu has a weird draw. Sometimes Akatsu will actually open with a combo piece that doesn't have Go Again naturally. So maybe they just throw a Fister Fist on the first chain link, and you're like, what? Same thing, sometimes maybe a Whelming Gust Wave. A lot of times what is happening here is that Katsu's they probably have a hand that is almost bricked. It's a hand that doesn't have natural Go Again, but it could get it if it gets a hit. Especially because Bruce Rider Boots, as soon as a ninja card hits, then they can pop it and all combo cards can go again, including the one that it attacked with. So let's say they open with a Fluster on a 5-card hand. And you're like, what is going on? That's really weird. It's really unlikely that they don't have natural Go Again, but sometimes it happens. But maybe they have a Pump. Maybe they have an Ancestral Empowerment. Or maybe they have a Razor Reflex. Some Razor Reflex has fallen out of grace recently, because the more that the decks try to bonds and bonds and bonds, the more that you want big pumpers like Art of War and things like that. But anyway, maybe they have it, but every deck probably has Ancestral Empowerment. So if they attack you with a Fluster Fist and they're trying to get Go Again, I would say most of the time it's worth it to block it, and maybe even overblock it just slightly. Maybe block 5 on a 4, and if they have the empowerment, let's see what happens, and then maybe they break Scales. But if they break Scales to do that, that's not necessarily the best thing for the Katsu, to break Scales and Boots in order to have a turn in which they can do things. So I would generally slightly overblock a Fluster Fist without Go Again, or a Whelming Gust Wave without Go Again. Other common ones would be, some people run Double Strike. Double Strike is just meant to basically get a free Katsu trigger. It's really hard to block it and get any value out of it, so a lot of times you just let the Katsu do his thing. But if you have the equipment or what have you, maybe you even have is that all you got kind of thing, then you can block it. But usually they're just trying to Katsu trigger and get things going with that. I very rarely, when I play Double Strike, start the big 30, 40 damage combo turn with a Double Strike. Usually I have a better setup than that, or I try to have a better setup. So usually it will be a Surging, a Descendant, That is the big combo turn, but it can happen. Let's see, what else? A note on, let's see. For the most part, I think that is most of the questions. But if they open with, a lot of times, obviously, Harmony has to be played at the beginning. So if they go Harmony, even if they whiff, if they follow with a Descendant, likely they also have a Bonds, because generally a good Katsu won't just blind Harmony with the risk of whiffing. If they are okay with the Harmony whiffing, it's because they have at least 2 or 3 cards that have combo and go again already in their hand. So if they go Harmony, if they hit, that's even better. But even if they miss, they might go Descendant, Bonds, something else, trying to get another Bonds, and then go off to the races with the combo. So that is something to be aware of. Now, let me see here on my notes, because I have, what else do I have? Actually, I think that is pretty much all the scenarios I can give. So just to recap a little bit, obviously Katsu is more dangerous on a 5-card hand. And generally speaking, on a 5-card hand, if they're opening with a Descendant or a Surging, they probably have it. So you probably should let that opener hit so you can have more information on what the turn is going to look like. Always block Be Like Water. It's too explosive. Like it goes from being a card that can be blocked by one card to a card that if it hits, it might just trigger a cascade of things that end up dealing like 40 damage. So I would always block Be Like Water, but like I said, always block it on break at the same. Don't overblock it. All right. Well, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you around. Have a good day.